โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Well, good evening and happy Vesak to you all. This is a special day in the Buddhist calendar, special evening, the full moon night in May, known as Visakha, is a day we come together to recollect the Buddha and his life, his birth, his enlightenment, his parinibbana. And we say happy Vesak because if you have faith in the Buddha and have found some benefit, value from his teachings, it will make you happy whenever you recollect the Buddha. Whether in a meditation, reciting the word Buddho, or in chanting, so when we chant the recollection of the virtues of the Buddha, so just now we chanted Iti Piso Bhagava. Whether reading suttas or hearing talks from living teachers, whatever, whenever we remember the Buddha, it can be an instant source of joy and happiness. And that just points to the role the Buddha has played in the world and in our lives. We call him the supremely enlightened Buddha and self-enlightened. And it's our good fortune to have been born at a time when the Buddhist teachings are here in the world, even though the Buddha passed away a long time ago. We say his guiding influence is still with us today. And a bit like New Year, Vesak, the Buddha's Enlightenment Day, it's a day to come back to review your life. What is your goal? Ask yourself, why are we here? What's the purpose of being born as a human being? What's our aim? We all have very short-term aims, of course, to get things done, earn a living, survive. But the Buddha gives us something much more deeper, more profound. For anyone who's has faith or conviction in the Buddhist teachings, it's a constant source of inspiration to recollect the Buddha and then to make use of these very clear, complete teachings which provide us with a pathway all the way to the end of stress and suffering, to the experience of nibbana, we say complete or the highest happiness. There's nobody born in the world who doesn't want to be happy. But unfortunately, many people don't know the way to find complete happiness. And so we end up often in our lives taking wrong turns, making stress and suffering for ourselves, for other people. So having come across the Buddhist teachings, whether from birth or through one's own good fortune, like myself, reading, meeting teachers, this is what can give great purpose to your life, and both on the highest level gives you a guiding ideal, a goal to follow and aspire to, but also on the practical level, the teachings are giving us practical and direct ways to deal with the problems of being a human being. And that's how these teachings came about. As you know, the life story of the Buddha is born into a wealthy ruling family, but he couldn't help but notice that there is stress and suffering as part of the human experience. We're all subject to birth, aging, sickness, death. What we call the ups and downs of life. The things go well, things don't go well. People like us, people don't like us. The successes, the failures. This is all something that he noticed from a very early age and had this interest, curiosity, and over time a determination to find a way to deal with it, a way to deal with the suffering and stress of life that was complete. And perhaps it was his accumulated bharami, as previously as a bodhisattva, being born and dying for many lifetimes, aspiring to become a Buddha. He had this intuition and insight that the real root cause of our stress and suffering as human beings is this mind, our own mind, that doesn't understand the truth, that gets lost in the world, gets lost in its wrong thinking, wrong views and attachments and confusions. He already had that insight, and that's what led him to go out into the forest, particularly to learn how to train the mind better in the form of a monk, even though the Buddhist religion hadn't been established yet because he wasn't enlightened. But to live in the forest like a monk, practicing meditation and learning to understand his mind better, and with the aim to completely free it from all causes of suffering. He didn't yet fully know what he would have to do or what would bring him that completion of freeing his mind from suffering, but he had the intuition that it's possible. And he studied with the best teachers of the day, who often people in those days considered were already enlightened, like a Buddha. But having studied with them, he realized their teachings were not fully complete, although they were very skilled meditators and taught him many useful things. He realized he hadn't reached or attained complete liberation of the mind. So then he went off to practice on his own to see if there was any other way, and he himself took a wrong direction. The Buddha was a human being like us. He wasn't a god or enlightened from birth. He was a human being like us. And so he took a few wrong turns in his practice, and one of them was to go off and practice what we call the ascetic practices, dukkha giriya, or that we say the way of self-deprivation, learning in line with some of the practices and teachings that were in India at the time, learning how to really push and pressure himself physically and mentally, learning how to fast, go without sleep, hold his breath, all kinds of ascetic practices that require great mental discipline, training, puts the body under great physical hardship. But ultimately he decided and realized are not the way to completely free the mind from the delusion and misunderstanding of truth that he recognized was the cause of suffering. So eventually he even abandoned that way of practice and came back on his own to what we now know as Bodh Gaya, to where the Bodhi tree is, where you can still go today, make that pilgrimage to find where the Buddha lived and practiced and became enlightened. And on this day, the full moon night in May, Visakha is the night he sat down under the Bodhi tree with the determination he wasn't going to get up until he'd done the job of completely freeing his mind from all ignorance, craving, delusions, attachments, all the different chain of mental processes that lead to experience of suffering for human beings. He wanted to really get to the root cause of that and root it out, change his mind for good, completely free himself, liberate himself from suffering, with the aim that he didn't want suffering to return. And who wants suffering to return in their life? If you know a way to get out of suffering, you would want that. So at this time, if you caught COVID-19, coronavirus, or any other illness, you would be hoping a doctor would give you a cure that completely cures you from it, frees you from it, so you can get on with your life. Or in the same way the Buddha was pursuing complete freedom, the complete cure of his own mind, what we call the mental disease, the mental afflictions that cause us stress and suffering as human beings, all those mental states and thoughts rooted in greed, anger, delusion. That was what was motivating him, and with this great determination and keen realization that he just had to keep pursuing that path, you might say doggedly, without giving up, until he completely understood the truth of his own mind. He wasn't going to give up. So that's the kind of attitude he had as he sat under the Bodhi tree on the night of his enlightenment. It's interesting, thinking of the Buddha's own life and enlightenment experience, which we tend to on these days. The first thing he did was recollect a time when he was 7 years old, when he was out with his father, the ruler of that area in India, who was performing a ploughing ceremony at the beginning of the growing season, rice growing season. As a young kid, he wasn't that interested in the ceremony, so he went off, separated from the crowd, and sat under a tree, and just quite naturally started to meditate on the feeling or the sensation of the in and out breath. And that was like a taste of things to come. And under the Bodhi tree on the night of his enlightenment, he remembered that, what it's like just to meditate on the breathing, relax the body and mind, let go of other concerns. Even a young boy might still have some concerns, some worries or some distractions, restlessness, or maybe even just boredom. But quite naturally he had learned on that day to follow the feeling with the breath and let go of all those different mental states that afflict us, distract us. And he became profoundly peaceful. His mind became very still. So on the night of his enlightenment, he remembered that practice, that experience, and took that as a clue. He already knew that human beings can make their minds peaceful, if only temporarily, but that's like a clue or an insight into what maybe the mind that is permanently peaceful is like. It's something that, it's your own direct experience. If you've ever meditated, and probably many of you have, even if you've only ever experienced just a few moments of peace where you've let go of your worries, your stress, any concerns about your physical health, worries about the past, the future, you've let go of that, if only for a few moments, you'll have experienced some peace, some stillness of mind, some relief from the stresses of life already. That's your own direct experience, and that is your clue or pathway, avenue into what the Buddha was talking about. Because everything he taught came from this mind that is well-trained, peaceful, having let go of distractions, clinging, greed, anger, delusion. All the insights and wisdom he gained came from that direct seeing of experience, understanding what is the cause of stress in his own mind and what he needs to do to abandon it. And you also have that same potential. And this is another reason to be very joyful on Vesak, is that we're remembering that the Buddha was a human being like us, even though he was extraordinary and he had extraordinary skills, qualities, and did an amazing thing for the world. Did the greatest service for humanity that anyone could do. Buddhists might believe that. Maybe others wouldn't, but I certainly believe that. He did all that through his own efforts as a human being, with a human body, human mind, just like us. But he reached his potential as a human. And not only that, he had the great compassion, kindness, generosity to share what he understood, even though he was reluctant at first to share his enlightenment experience, because he wasn't sure that anyone would really want to follow or try it for themselves. But he did, and that's why we still have these teachings today. But he was a human being, like us, working with the strengths and weaknesses of a human body and mind. And that's important for us, because then we can see that what the Buddha realized, the understanding, say, of the Four Noble Truths, the insight into suffering and what to do about it and how to end it, we can do that as well. And he always reminded his students that what he taught is only things that we can practice, nothing that is beyond us. Because particularly in India at that time, but in other parts of the world, in other cultures, sometimes one has the feeling that one can only proceed or better oneself, improve oneself with the grace of a supernatural being, a greater being, another person, a God, some external entity. Whereas the Buddhist teachings are founded on the importance of understanding the process of karma and cause and effect, and that if we're experiencing stress as human beings, we did it to ourselves. It comes through its own set of causes, which ultimately link or come back to us. Even though other people in the world are involved in some of our stress, and we possibly create stress for others, ultimately the place to remedy stress is in our own minds, through our own efforts, understanding the process of cause and effect that leads to stress, suffering arising in a human mind. He taught this, and this is the hope we have as human beings, is that there is a way out of stress. And we can develop that path and that method, that way that will lead out of stress. We can all do that. We have that potential. It's interesting, when I was thinking about this fact, often it brings to mind one interview that took place in Thailand, where I used to live, way back in the late 70s. The BBC, they did a few different interviews in Thailand. One of them was with Ajahn Chah, my teacher, but also with the Thai king, who was one of the few Buddhist kings in the world at that time. That's King Bhumibol Rama IX, who passed away a few years ago. And during that interview, one of the things they were talking about was the religion, the role of religion in Thai culture, Buddhism, the Buddhist teachings. And the interviewer asked the king if he believed in original sin, the view that somehow we're flawed from day one, and the human mind is just essentially flawed, and it needs some extra force, supernatural being, to pull it out of its suffering and its problems. And the Thai king answered, "No, I don't believe in original sin, I believe in the original purity of the mind." This is another important factor or point in the Buddhist teachings, is that through his own efforts, the Buddha understood that the reason we suffer and get stressed in our lives is because the mind kind of gets invaded, taken over by what we call kilesa, mental afflictions, mental disease, a bit like viruses and bacteria invade the body and make us physically sick. The mind also becomes physically sick because of the invasion of the mental kilesas, rooted, that's thoughts, mental states, intentions rooted in greed, anger, delusion. But inherently it's not greedy, angry, deluded. This mind is inherently, or in essence, it doesn't have to suffer. Its nature is actually pure, free from suffering. And the Thai king understood that because he'd had many good teachers in his life, forest monks from our forest tradition, who had given him what we call right view, samadhi. He may not have been fully enlightened himself, but he had a good teaching and good path, and he had that understanding that the human mind can always improve if we have enough awareness, insight to recognize that these mental kilesas are the root cause of our suffering, recognize, expose them for what they are, and find a way to remove them from our experience. And we can do that because they're external or temporary invaders that come into the mind, but they're not part of the mind. They're something separate from the mind. And the Buddhist path and the Buddha's realization on the night of his enlightenment was based around this. The fact that this human mind can be freed from its wrong thinking, the experience of stress, unhappiness. This may take time, effort, of course, but it can be done. And in the process, the lead up to that full realization of the enlightenment experience on the night of his enlightenment, some other insights arose to him as he was sitting under the Bodhi tree. He remembered this experience as a boy sitting in meditation, so he practiced anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, following the breath in and out, letting go of all the distracted states of mind, the worries, the fears, the doubts, concerns about pain in the body, feelings of tiredness, letting go of all of that, and brought his mind to a state of calm, stillness, one-pointedness, which we call samadhi. And as he attained samadhi during the early part of the night, he gained insight we call the recollection of past lives, pupeni vasanu satiyana. He could recollect countless past lives that he had experienced in the past, living in all kinds of different life situations, being a human, an animal, rich, poor, successful, full of problems, all kinds of different experiences and countless lifetimes. And he could see that as long as one doesn't, one is still bound up to this sense of self, attachment to body and mind as a self, one has to keep going round in circles, being born and dying over and over again. And that led on to the second insight later on in the night, into the fact that all beings are subject to karma, the law of karma, the natural law of cause and effect. You do good, good results come. You do bad, bad results come. Karma is constantly affecting us, whether we realize it or not, whether we understand it or not. It's just there, it's happening in the world. Like there are many other laws of nature, of course, but this is one that is vital to understand if we're going to train this mind. And this is what leads to the experiences of happiness and suffering, pleasure and pain, that human beings have to experience in a cyclical way, over and over again, experiencing pleasure and then it falling back, having more pain, more stress, more suffering. And karma is affecting us all the way through our life and indeed into the next life. As long as we haven't understood this process, it's affecting us and has affected us in the past. And he could see that. He had enough insight, the clarity to see that beings are being born and dying all the time, where they're reborn is based on their karma, and the experiences they've had from the past will come up again as karmic results. And this wasn't an insight into a sort of fatalistic view of life, that everything is just predetermined by karma. It's more an insight into the urgency to understand karma, because if we're still falling into wrong thinking and wrong views, wrong ways of behaviour, wrong conduct, then it will keep causing us suffering over and over again. And where we make karma is in the present, so even though we are receiving the fruits of our past karma, we're making fresh karma every moment, every day. And this insight gave him the urgency to really understand that, not only for himself, but he could also see that's the way of human beings, they're subject to karma. This led on to that final realization later in the night. At the end of suffering came when he had the insight into these kilesas, greed, anger, delusion, our wrong views and opinions fueled by misunderstanding of the truth, fueled by craving and attachment. If one could abandon that, change that process, stop it from happening in the human mind, then one can experience complete liberation of mind from all suffering and from the round of rebirth. What we call asava, kaya yana, in the end of the asavas, the kilesas, the mental defilements that cause this mind suffering, completely abandoned, freed from the mind, freed from them, never to return. That was the final insight he had, that was his enlightenment experience. And he had that wisdom now to realize this is something no one else has actually taught before or realized before. If they have realized before, it's so far in the distant past no one can remember anymore. So this was something new, and this is the great gift the Buddha gave to the world. He had this complete understanding of how suffering is caused in a human mind and how it's abandoned, what we have to do. And this led on to his teaching later in his life, teaching what we call the Eightfold Noble Path, the practice and development of sila, learning to live and restrain oneself, live in a harmless way, restrain one's harmful tendencies in speech and action, to live in a moral way, and then to develop samadhi through development of mindfulness, states of calm, stillness, increasingly refined states of calm that purify this practice of mindfulness and give one a basis for developing clear insight into the nature of phenomena, both physical phenomena, this body and the physical world around us, and mental phenomena, our mind and how it is conditioned. And this conditioning process, one thing leading to another, not understanding that, not penetrating or realizing that, is how suffering arises. But as one develops more mindfulness, samadhi, the mind becomes brighter, clearer, then these truths were revealed to him, and this is what he's been teaching, was teaching in his life, and we are still practicing today. And it can be practiced. It's still possible today. We have Ajahn Chah as our teacher, like modern proof that this way does work for human beings. And in the modern environment, modern situation, Ajahn Chah is another example like the Buddha. He was born as a human being, but he dedicated his efforts to pursuing and penetrating these Four Noble Truths through his practice. And we believe he did that, he achieved that. So it's not as if the Buddhist teachings are only really relevant as some ancient philosophy, ancient teaching was only possible to get enlightened way back then, 2,600 odd years ago. There are still living teachers in this day and age who have put those teachings into practice and found success in the same way. They've had the same realizations. It's interesting, when the Buddha was setting up his seat under the Bodhi tree on that night, there was a Brahmin, a local Brahmin came by, Sotia, and he gave the Buddha some grass to sit on as a seat. He recognized the Buddha as a meditator, a renunciant, and he wanted to support him, so he offered these 8 bundles of grass to the Buddha, and these, the Buddha said, symbolize the 8 worldly winds, the different experiences we have as human beings. We all have to go through them. Having been born in the world, we have to experience these winds pushing us around, blowing us around. So there are 4 pairs of experience: gain and loss, praise and blame, status, loss of status, pleasure and pain. And the Buddha said all human beings, all beings are subject to these four pairs of experience. You gain things, but then you lose. You're praised, but then you're criticized. You gain status, then you lose that. We have pleasure, but then we have pain as well. These are what push human beings, the minds, particularly the minds of human beings, around all the time. When they lack the mindfulness, the wisdom that the path generates, when they lack that, then these 8 worldly winds push them around. We go up, we go down all the time in our life. But he was making his seat on top of these 8 bundles of grass. He already had that insight he was going to go beyond, transcend the 8 worldly winds to something that's better, more peaceful, a higher happiness, something that's still, something that is more reliable. Or we say a true refuge in his own heart. That was what he was aiming at, and he achieved that. And he and teachers like Ajahn Chah went through all kinds of difficulties in their practice. Just as we have to experience difficulties in our life, they did as well. So it's not like they were just born peaceful and wise. They had to develop those qualities through their practice. That's where we have to be quite resilient and patient in our practice and draw inspiration from the Buddha and our teachers, because it's not always easy, it's not always quick that you'll get results. One has to keep going. As Luang Por Chah used to say, if you want to eat chilies, you have to plant that chili plant and look after it. It might take you a year before you get chili fruits, or however long it will take. Your job is to look after the plant, protect it from the animals, make sure it gets sun, water it, fertilize it, and eventually it will produce chilies. If you want success in your practice, you have to keep creating the skillful causes. Keep doing it, keep going. But by recollecting the Buddha, you can get that strength, that confidence and conviction that this is a path that works, that can help us. And so tonight we're celebrating that. In a moment we will do our circumambulation of the hall, what we normally would do with you, but because of the current government restrictions, just the resident Sangha will do it tonight. And you can, as we're holding our flowers and candles and incense and recite the verse of announcing Visakha Puja, you can follow along tonight. You can hold your flowers and candles and recite the verse with us, and then afterwards, when we finish the circumambulation, you can also place them. If you have a Buddha statue or a picture of Buddha, you can place them down there as a sign of your gratitude to the Buddha, your dedication to the Buddha and the path of practice of the Buddha. So I encourage you to use this night fruitfully, recollect the Buddha and what he means to you, because he can be a guiding inspiration for the whole of your life, right to the very end of your life. And if you put effort into this practice, it can bring you to the complete ending of suffering. And this is something you can draw inspiration from every day, recollecting the Buddha, meditating, chanting, keeping the precepts, practicing generosity and compassion for others. These are the way of practice that we can be confident will bring us to the end of suffering. So I'll leave the talk there for tonight, and in a moment we'll do our verses of offering to the Buddha.
Antamayang Gowatagata Satukarang Tatamase Sadhu 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 Anamodami.
So if you do have any flowers or incense candles, you can hold them at this time, and in a moment I will lead you in reciting the verse.
198, Volume 2.
Namayang Buddhasa Bhagavato Buddhapāganamakarang Garomasi Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Please repeat after me. All of us take the Buddha as our refuge. And we delight in the Dhamma that he taught. The Buddha was born among the Aryan people in the Ganges Valley in India. A warrior by caste of the Gautama clan and a son of the Sakyan people. He went forth from home into homelessness and attained full and complete enlightenment in this world with its devas, its maras and brahmas. This multitude with its samanas and brahmins together, with its rulers and ordinary people. He is an arahant, fully enlightened by himself, impeccable in conduct and understanding, an accomplished one, knower of the worlds, incomparable teacher of those who wish to be trained, awakened and holy. Furthermore, the Dhamma that he expounded so well can be seen here and now, not delayed in time, inviting one to come and see, leading inwards, to be known by each wise person for themselves. The Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples has practiced well, practiced directly, practiced insightfully, and practiced with integrity. The four pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings, are the Blessed One's disciples. Such ones are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respect. They give occasion for incomparable goodness to arise in the world. Now we have arrived at the full moon night in the month of Visakha, which we know to be the day when the Lord was born, attained enlightenment, and passed into parinibbana. And gathering here on this occasion, with these offerings, recollecting the virtues of the Lord Buddha, we shall circumambulate the Buddha image 3 times. Although he passed into Nibbana long ago, the Buddha's guiding influence is still with us today. May our offerings be received and accepted for our long-lasting welfare and for the happiness of all future generations. For those watching, you can just sit and quietly meditate and chant Iti Piso until we finish, and then we'll have a final blessing.
Bhagavato Savaka Sangho
So, we'll finish tonight's program by chanting a blessing for you on this auspicious occasion of Visakha Puja or Vesak. We will wish you all freedom from suffering, suffering of the body, disease, suffering of the mind, stress. May your life be free from obstacles and dangers. May the blessings of the Triple Gem guide you, protect you, lead you in the right direction all the way to Nibbana, the end of suffering. Yathavari Pura Paripurenti Sakarang. Just as rivers full of water fill the ocean full, Ewa mewa hitotinang betanang upakapati. Even so does that here given benefit the dead. Ichitam patitam dumangipamewa samichatu. Whatever you wish or want, quickly come to me. Sabbe purentu sankabha. May all your aspirations be fulfilled. Janto panaraso yatha mani jyotiraso yatha. As the moon on the 15th day, or as a radiant bright gem, sabitiyo vivachantu. May all distresses be averted. Sabbarogo vinasatu. May every disease be destroyed. Mate bhavantvantarayo. May there be no dangers for you. Sukhi dikayuko bhava. May you be happy and live long. Abhivadana silisa. For one of respectful nature. Nichang Vuddhapajayino. Who constantly honors the worthy. Chattaro Dhamma vadanti. Four qualities qualities increase. Ayuvanno sukhang balang, long life, beauty, happiness and strength. Bhavatu sabbamangalang, may there be every good blessing. Rakantu sabba-devata, may all the devas protect you. Sabba-buddha-nubhavena, by all the power of the Buddha. Sabba-dhamma-nubhavena, by all the power of the Dhamma. Sabba-sangha-nubhavena, by all the power of the Sangha. Sada soti bhavantu te, may you always be well. So that blessing was for all of you, and particularly for all the people who've been supporting the monastery through this last period of the government restrictions due to COVID-19 virus. We appreciate all the food and offerings you've made to keep us supported, and indeed throughout the whole year. May that be a cause for your progress in the Dhamma and your happiness. And we'll just pay our final respects to the Triple Gem, and then I'd encourage you all to do some more practice tonight. The weather is very nice here in the monastery. It's calm, peaceful, there's a full moon. It's a good opportunity to do some more sitting or walking meditation or chanting. And we'll see you next time.